Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here. Kind of snuck up on me all of a sudden. It's 7 o'clock. Anyway, I am Eric the Car Guy. I will be here answering your automotive questions posted to the Google Plus event, number 59 in this program. A few things before I get started. First, I want to apologize for messing up your names because sometimes I do that. Difficulty reading. I don't know what it is, but I just want to apologize for that in advance. Also, I will be taking the questions from the Google Plus event, as I mentioned. For those of you watching on YouTube, I can't see those comments that are going up while I'm shooting the video, so unfortunately I won't be answering those questions that are posted to the YouTube video. Now, there is always EricTheCarGuy.com. I have an FAQ page there that covers many of the questions that I get asked, full of useful information, including text and also videos that go along with all that stuff, covering many of the major things, like I said, that I get asked about. Also, there is a forum that I have there, so if you can't find it in the FAQ section, you can find it there. So we have resources at EricTheCarGuy.com that are available all the time, other than me doing these shows every other week. And speaking of which, I believe the next show will be on the 17th. So we'll have tonight's show, and if I miss you, well, we can try again on the 17th. But for now, there's a lot of ground I want to cover, and I want to spend most of my time answering questions rather than explaining the questions that I'm not answering. Let's get to that, shall we? All right. Clicking a few things here. Clicking a few things here. There it is. I suppose it would help if I clicked on the right tab in the browser. Well done, Eric. Okay, Anil Rampal. Hey, Eric, I have a 2003 Acura MDX with a mystery oil leak developing by the bottom of the oil pan. I'm pretty sure it's not the rear main seal, as I don't see a trace of oil where the engine and training meets. After doing a bit of research, it seems that the oil pump seal, oil filter housing seal are common culprits. I also have not ruled out the front main seal. I cleaned up the oil leak to recheck for fresh drips soon to see if I can get a better trace on where it's coming from. I know you're specifically knowledgeable when it comes to Acura and Honda vehicles. Where do you think the leak is coming from? Thanks for reading. Honestly, I can't say where it's coming from without looking at it. You're following a good procedure. I mean, I start with cleaning everything up really good. There's a couple of ways you can go about this. Sometimes you can add oil or add dye to the oil itself, and then you can look at it with an ultraviolet light, and that can help pinpoint the source of leaks very easily. But many times I find in these situations, you're going to have to start taking things apart to find out precisely where it's leaking. Specifically, in this case, the timing cover and all the other stuff. Now, you say oil pump seal, that kind of thing, and that's so much easier to say than it is to actually pursue. And honestly, that's not a common thing from what I've seen. It's rare that I see the oil leaks on the front of the J-Series engine. In fact, I mostly see them in the rear by the rear main seal, unfortunately. And that of course, involves removing the transmission. If you need to do the oil pump, I believe you also need to drop the oil pan itself to do that. Because I believe the bottom part of it is actually bolted to the oil pan. So that's not as easy as you might think. So take a look at the severity of the oil leak and see if it's something that warrants further investigation. Some small oil leaks, particularly on, we're talking about a 2003 here, some oil leaks, especially on an older engine, I would consider acceptable. But if it's leaving like, drips on your driveway all the time, an occasional drip, I wouldn't worry about it. But I mean, if it's pouring out and you're losing lots of oil, okay, pursue it. Other than that, on something that old, you might be getting in deeper than you need to, especially if you start removing oil pumps and things. And if you don't get something like that back in there correctly, it's bye-bye engine. So yeah, consider the severity and where it's coming from. Like I say, in my opinion, the best way to find the leak is with dye, because it's really bright, glowy yellow stuff that shows up when you do have a leak like that. But it starts with cleaning, and you've already done that. But without seeing it for myself, I can't say specifically where the oil leak is coming from. I do have a write-up on this on the FAQ page that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, so you might want to go to my website and check that out. It's under leaks. Caravan Renew. Hey, Eric, how do you know when to change rear drum shoes? Do they have indicators or make a squealing noise like front brakes? Also, do you need to service them or just give them a basic clean every 30,000 miles? Like you mentioned, disc brakes, or just replace them and forget about them until after 100,000 miles? Thanks. Excellent question, honestly. It depends on a lot of things. I mean, really, as you pointed out, as you already seem to be aware, drum brakes take a long time to wear out. They're only doing a small percentage of the braking, and they do seem to last a really long time. I've seen drum brakes last more than 100,000 miles, as you pointed out. As far as general maintenance and service, especially if you live in an area with a lot of salt and corrosion, the self-adjuster mechanism may get frozen up. And as a result, it can affect the way your brake pedal feels. It doesn't necessarily affect your braking, but your brake pedal may travel down further as a result of rear brakes that are misadjusted. Same is true for your parking brake, because your parking brake and the amount of travel that it has is directly in relationship to the adjustment of the rear brakes. Now, in the drum brake videos that I have done, I show the adjustment of the rear brakes and also cleaning the rear brakes. So servicing of drum brakes for me has always been, cleaning them out. And when you do this, the dust is not good for you to breathe in. So wear a dust mask. That's probably going to be one of the best things to do. But if you do decide to clean drum brakes, try to pull them just off of the hub a little bit and then spray down inside, put something underneath to catch any of the stuff that comes out, rather than removing the drum completely before you start spraying in there. That will help minimize the amount of dust that gets into the air and gets into you, which is harmful. So with all that being said, you want to make sure that those adjusters are working correctly. And normally what I do is when I'm doing a front brakes job on a vehicle that has rear drum brakes, I just go back and I check the rears. And I do this for a couple of reasons. I do this to inspect the wheel cylinders. I pull the boots back and see if there's any seepage that are coming out of there. But I also go for the opportunity to clean and adjust the rears, because if I'm doing a front brake job, the front brakes I know are going to be good. But as I mentioned, if the brake pedal doesn't feel good after you get done with a brake job, a customer tends to notice that. So I try to give them the best brake pedal I can. So I go back and do my cleaning and adjusting the rears at that time. So as far as an interval, when I'm replacing the front brakes, I usually do the rear brakes, and it just seems to work out well that way. Also, let's see what else that I can impart. Sometimes brake shoes will wear into the backing plate. They'll wear a groove, and they'll get to a point where they start to pop and make noise during operation. And what I've done in the past for that is, as you may have seen in my drum brake videos, is after the shoes are removed, I clean up the bosses where the brake shoes ride on the back and lubricate those. And that usually helps that noise. That wear seems to be something that's always going to be there. But the cleaning lubrication usually works. However, it can get severe enough. I've actually seen it to the point where it's worn through the back of the backing plate. And at that point, you have a couple of choices. You can actually weld it and grind it down, or replace the backing plate, one of those two things. So check for noise, but as far as servicing them, I usually do it when I do a front brake job. Also, if you have a parking brake that does seem to have excessive travel, don't adjust the cable straight away. Go back and adjust the rear brakes first, and then see if your parking brake travel is acceptable. If it's not acceptable at that point, then do the adjustment at the cable if that's possible. So there's a little bit of, I hope that's what you're looking for, because as far as a service interval, like I say, front brakes, as far as problems and noises and things like that. But other than that, I would leave them alone until they wear out. And there's a good time to do the inspection if the front brakes are worn out. So if you're servicing the rear brakes, it's a good time to take a look back there and see what's happening. Thomas Campbell, do you think Lucas oil stabilizer works for adding better lubrication? Is there a time where you would use it? Honestly, I'm not a fan of additives. I try to use good oil, and good oil has a really good additive package to start with out of the box. You start mixing it with other components, other chemicals, it could have an adverse reaction to the oil that you're using. Lucas oil stabilizer, I'm sure is formulated to such a degree to where it tries to minimize that effect. But you're adding another variable into the system. And if you're using good oil and you're changing it on a regular basis, I can't see how it's really necessary to add anything else. I'm the same way with fuel additives. You know, it's like, it's running fine. Gasoline's a solvent to begin with. You know, there are times when it can benefit, but honestly, when an engine is that gummed up inside, it has other problems besides the fuel delivery system. It's just been my experience. So I just try to keep things well maintained, and that usually seems to be effective for me. Ross W. has written quite a bit here. He's back with his 2006 Hyundai Tiburon GS that he had in a previous show. As you may recall from last week, I'm getting an intermittent O2 sensor code, P0130, O2 sensor bank 1, sensor 1 circuit malfunction. I don't know where to go after changing the O2 sensor. Another thing I've noticed is the code pops up usually while idling 1 to 2 minutes after startup. I can kill the engine for roughly 15 seconds and start it back up, and the check engine light is then off. He goes on with, I also have this issue that occurs on very certain parts of new highway road. The ones with sluts. Basically, after I put on winter wheels, the car would wobble on the new highway roads in 2 1-mile-long spots. The rest of the time it's fine. I changed the rear struts, which made a world of difference. They were long gone. Previously, I had to slow down in these spots. It was so bad. But now I can stick to 75 miles per hour, no problem. This didn't fix the issue, though. It still feels like the back of the car is fighting the front, to the point where sometimes the back will jump a fair amount and the steering wheel countersteer on its own. Is this the only issue? This is the only issue on 2 particular 1-mile spots of road, and it's normal on all the roads. This wasn't an issue with the summer wheels, just the winter wheels. I also had the alignment done last summer, and they said everything was in spec. They didn't say if it was a 4- or 2-wheel alignment, if that helps any. I don't know if an alignment can change between 2 sets of wheels. Sorry about any typos. Don't worry about that kind of stuff. Okay, going back to the O2 sensor malfunction. I believe you had already said that you'd replace the O2 sensors. That means the O2 sensors are not the problem. As far as where the problem is from there, connectors, wiring, everything between that O2 sensor and the computer is suspect. You might start by going to the computer, or not even that, plugging in a scan tool and seeing what the computer is seeing. If those readings don't look like they're fluctuating like a normal O2 sensor should, then definitely, if you've got a new O2 sensor in there already, definitely start looking into the wiring and taking it piece by piece to try to figure out, find out connector by connector if there's a problem in a connector itself, like maybe there's some corrosion or something down inside there, or maybe there's something wrong with the wires. Maybe the wires rubbed up against something and they've chafed, and it's causing that malfunction to come on. But basically, you want to see what the O2 sensor is putting out. The easiest way to do that, I think, is with a scan tool and pulling up the live data. If you're unable to do that, I'm not really sure where to tell you to go with this, because after that, it's electrical diagnosis. It's checking out, the resistance, it's checking out the wires, it's seeing how the rest of the circuit looks. So, if you're getting too much resistance in that circuit somewhere, or there's a short or something like that, that could cause that code. It could have nothing to do with the sensor itself. As far as the issue with the tires, now, winter tires are going to be different than summer tires. The alignment is not going to have anything to do with it, but the jumping around is somewhat interesting. I don't know if that's a problem with the tires themselves. You say it's only on certain parts of the road. I'm assuming you're talking about grooved pavement here that's leading it down there. Maybe the winter tires have a different traction. Well, obviously they're going to have different traction than the summer tires, and maybe that's the reason why you have this effect. Honestly, I'm at a loss on that one as far as what's causing it to go around like that. The rear shock absorbers or struts that are back, they're only there to control the movement of the rear suspension. So they probably helped if you had, like, say, worn out shocks or struts back there. So that probably helped with that stability, but there may be other parts of the suspension that may be loose. Now, you said you had an alignment done, and they should have checked that during the alignment for any loose suspension components, but there's still something loose back there, and you've got more traction. It could take the rear end of the vehicle and move it around enough, laterally. Maybe there's a bushing or something like that that's gone away. That's allowing that excess movement that's causing that problem. And if that's the case, well, the people that did the alignment should have caught that. And if they didn't do a complete inspection of the suspension and they just did the alignment, then yeah, your alignment's good, but your suspension isn't solid. So there's that possibility. The only way to figure that out is to get down in there and put your eyeballs on it. Michael Sextine, he's a regular on the show. Hi, Michael. Hey, Eric, my brother's 2006 Honda Pilot has been having an ongoing issue with the front dome lights not coming on when you open the door. Used to be that just one light didn't come on, but now they both don't come on. However, all the dome lights in the rear come on. I tried taking it apart, replacing the bulbs, and even spraying down the connections with electrical cleaner to no avail. After doing some research, I came across a video on YouTube with a guy that had a Honda Accord with the same issue, and he replaced the push-button switches on the lights, which solved the problem. So I went ahead and ordered some. My question is, have you seen this problem? And do you think it will resolve the issue? Honestly, I've seen it, and a lot of times it was the switch, because really that's all there is. All you got is power and ground and a switch that's going up there. And then, of course, when you open the doors, it turns them on. And the first thing I always check for is the switch activated, because if the lights are actually off, they won't come on. So you have to make sure that, you know, you tried a couple of times. I'm going to assume you did that, but it's worth noting, it's worth saying that I've gone down this path before, and all I had to do was turn it on. So there is that possibility. But if that's the case, then, you know, the rest of the circuit is working because all the other lights come on. So unless it's not being sent a signal for whatever reason, and usually that's going to be all in the same harness, all the interior lights. It usually goes up one of the pillars and supplies everything with all the powers, and well, sometimes it just grounds right to the roof liner itself. And that's something that might be worth checking, especially if you did take that down, because I almost think that some of the screws that actually hold the assembly into place are the ground circuit for that light. So you want to make sure that those are good. So make sure you got power and ground. I mean, quite simply, you know, with light circuits, it's pretty simple and straightforward. It's going to be 12 volts. They don't run different voltage to lights. So check to see if you got power and ground there. If you got power and ground and the switch isn't operational, you can even disconnect it and ohm out the switch. If the switch is dead when you ohm it out, then you know for sure that the switch is the problem. But as far as me telling you, yeah, you know, go ahead and do that, can't say, because like it's still, like I said, could be a ground problem or even a wiring problem. Those dome lights, when you put them up in there, you can pinch a wire or something of that nature while you're doing that. So that's a distinct possibility too. I have seen that. I have seen people who've pulled down dome lights, screwed it back up in there, pinched a wire when they did it. It shorted out against the roof line, and actually, I think that took out all the dome lights at that point. That was a fun day. Anyway. So just check around. I mean, just the basics, power, ground, that kind of stuff. I'll put a link in the description to electrical diagnosis article that I wrote that may be helpful to you. Yeah, the names tonight. Steamy Snurdly, I don't know. Has an 01 Toyota Sequoia, 275,000 miles, daily driver, great shape for age miles. So I definitely want to keep it for years to come. My question is, how long should the factory suspension last? I'm sure shocks and struts could stand to be replaced, but what about the bushings, sway bar, control arms, etc.? I'm in Indiana, so if you'd like to do a video documenting a total overhaul of said parts, I'd definitely be interested in supplying the parts, vehicle, and labor rate in exchange for the knowledge. Thanks for your videos, passion, greatly appreciated. Thank you for that comment. All right, now as far as replacement interval, I'm going to say that Toyota generally makes a pretty solid suspension, especially on their SUVs and stuff. So, and here's the other thing, and I hate saying this, because when you're talking about a vehicle that's this old, it's an 01, it's got almost 300,000 miles on it. Nothing is going to work better than the Toyota parts. And the thing is they're very proud of those parts. And as a result, super expensive. So if you start putting different aftermarket parts on the suspension, it's not going to ride the same. Tires are actually going to have the biggest effect on everything. As far as when things wear out, well, that depends on a number of factors. And at that kind of mileage and that age, so many things can affect it. You know, you really have to. The only thing you can really do is replace everything to renew it. And that just is not practical. I mean, I've gone through it. I've actually done it. I had an Accord that I replaced all the bushings in the front and rear, neoprene bushings. And that was a very long, arduous day, I can tell you. And I had a full shop full of all the right equipment, torches, everything. And it took a full day to do it. I will say that when I got done, that thing rode like no other Accord ever. And it was really good. Will the same apply for yours? Probably, but you're talking about twice the amount of suspension parts that little Accord had. So you really have to weigh the good with the bad here. I keep an eye on the struts. Look for leaks in the struts. The struts are going to have probably one of the biggest effects on ride quality. The springs themselves over time will wear out and they'll sag. They do it by an imperceptible amount, and the only way to really tell is to measure the ride height. And also possibly an alignment might reveal something like that. Once again, you know, it's like, you know, how far do you get into this? And as far as the bushings and the rest of the suspension parts, well, once again, a good inspection. Look for cracks. Look for orange dust around different parts, because you see like an orange dust around suspension parts, that usually indicates something that's loose or worn out. You might see it around tie rod ends, or I've seen it around ball joints sometimes. But that's a good indicator that things have gone metal to metal, and that orange dust is actually fine rust shavings that come out. And like I said, real good indicator. But an inspection is what's going to reveal what is necessary. Now, is this something I have an interest in doing? Yeah, it would be really cool. However, I think me and a whole lot of fans out there really want me to get going on the Fairmont. In fact, I just got a very heavy delivery today that we'll be talking about sometime in the not too distant future of some parts I got for said vehicle. So when I get done doing my stuff and my traveling coming up here, I'm working on the Fairmont and nothing else. So that's where I'm going with that. But I wish you luck with that. Good inspection. I'll put a link in the description to a suspension inspection video that I did that may be helpful for you. May help you find some of those things, but that's outside of that, you're just spending a lot of money on a really old vehicle. George Cousins has a Nissan 1.6 setting cams. Doesn't matter how you set intake at 9 o'clock, possibly, and exhaust at 12, just as long as the gear dots line up with the blue links on the chain. I just recently did. In fact, I'll be working on the edits of a video on the. Was that a 1.6? No, it was bigger than that. It was 2.5 liter Nissan engine, dual overhead cam, which it sounds like you're also dealing with a dual overhead cam here. And you have to set the links to the marks not only on the camshafts, but also on the crankshaft, which can be kind of tricky because the cams want to move because the valve springs are pushing on the cam lobes, and that can be fun. And then you got to put the guides in there. It's really fiddly. It's really fiddly, I know, but you got to make sure all the links line up. Then once all the links line up, both on the crank and the camshafts, just because it's a chain and the amount of work that you often have to go through to get back to the chain, I rotate the engine. It could take up to 4 times. It could take several times in order to rotate the engine to get it to a place to where the marks line up again, but they won't line up every time. So if you rotate it around 1 revolution after you put all the marks and line everything up, they're not going to line up again. They do this on purpose. It's called hunting, because they don't want every tooth on the chain to come to the same tooth on the cam or the crank every rotation. They want it to move around a little bit. That's another reason why timing belts don't perfectly line up with the timing marks when you put them together. It's engineered that way so that timing belts, timing chains, they're designed to be hunting is what it's called. Anyway, you're going to have to rotate it around a few times just to make sure all the links line up again. Actually, maybe several times. In this video series with that timing chain will be coming out in a while, but service manual is going to be your best friend here. It should point you in the right direction. But outside of that, you've got to line the links up, not just with the cam. You got to line them up underneath too, because if you don't get it in time, bad things can happen. So you want to make absolutely certain before you button that thing up, fire it up, that it is in correct time. Abel Chaparro. His dad's 2009 Dodge Caravan is having problems, one of which is that whenever he brakes, they squeak and grind. He recently put on new brakes and rotors. He doesn't know if it matters, but at about 109, it has 109,000. Also, love your videos. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Abel. Now, I think the #1 complaint that I get about brakes is noise, and many times it comes back to the friction material that's used. Also, let's see, having problems, squeak and grind, brakes and rotors. So everything should be new. All the friction material is new. Whenever you remove old rotors and that type of stuff, especially on an older vehicle like this, and I'm assuming it's going to be rusted up too, that rust can get jammed down into different places, and that can cause noise. Sometimes it binds up between the caliper parts itself. Sometimes next to the brake pads, somewhere in there where you can't necessarily see it. I would recommend going back in, taking the stuff apart, inspecting it, and seeing if there's an obvious problem, maybe like some hunk of rust or something that might be in there. Also, the splash shields behind the rotors, that metal that's behind the rotor. When you're in there moving things around, putting brakes on, sometimes that splash shield can get bent and come into contact with the moving rotor, thus causing a grinding noise. Those are the things that come to mind firsthand, and that's what I'd be checking for. Also, the less expensive friction materials that you can buy, they may be more noisy. They may work fine, but they may make more noise than, say, the more expensive brands of brake pads. Personally, I like ceramics. Semi-metallics are okay, but I've just been a real fan of ceramics. I work on a lot of Asian vehicles, and a lot of them use ceramic friction material to start with. So I hope that helps. I'll also put a link in the description to an article I did about brakes, and also for finding noises. If that's not the case, maybe there's something else that's making noise that's not brake related. Ajaran Marcola has a 2006 Mazda 3 with a knocking sound. when clutch start bind. Do you know what caused this sound? It doesn't appears every time, mostly when I start off. I check the suspension lower ball joint, had a little bit of play. Thanks for your answer. Okay, what I'm gathering here is when you release the clutch, you're hearing a noise. There's a ton of stuff that can cause this. The first thing that comes to mind, manual transmissions, 2006, is 10 years old. Possibly engine mounts. That's another place to look. Manual transmissions are fairly hard on engine mounts because of the forces that are applied. So look at engine mounts. Easy way to look at engine mounts on a vehicle like this is put it in gear, no parking brake, engine off. Open the hood and just rock the car back and forth and look at the end with the hood open. Look at the engine and listen also while you're looking. If there's an excessive amount of movement of that engine going back and forth as you're doing this, and you may even be able to see a broken mount in that instance, that may be a good place to look. Also, loose suspension parts, like you say, ball joints, things like that, they could also come into play. And then there's, once again, going back to the transmission itself. Maybe there's a problem in there. It's really hard to say. I'll post a link in the description to an article that I wrote about noises and finding them. And if what I said here didn't help you, perhaps something in there can. Whitney Ince, sorry, stuck at this. Avid watcher, has a 2002 Honda CR-V with 189,000 miles on it. Runs fine, except for when I'm sitting in park at idle for long periods, like 10 to 15 minutes, it starts to overheat. I'm waiting for someone at the airport a few weeks ago, stuck in traffic another day, car began to overheat. I turned it off, and when I turned it back on both times, it was idling really rough and almost stalled before it started moving. The car was fine. Any thoughts? Then car was fine. So it idled rough, and then it went back to being fine. Sitting in traffic and overheating, that says to me probably cooling fan problem. There may not be a cooling fan coming on. The fact that it runs rough after you shut it off and start it back up, maybe coolant temperature sensor, but I would think out of 2002 that would come along with a check engine light. So if you have a check engine light, pull that check engine light and see if there's a code that has anything to do with coolant temperature sensor or something of that nature. Outside of that, yeah, you know, when you're sitting and you're having cooling system problem, that's usually what it is. However, I always say this, and I can't believe I forgot to say it: check for air in the cooling system. Anytime there's air in the cooling system, it wreaks havoc on the entire system. An air pocket can cause sensors not to function properly, fans not to come on, heat inside the vehicle not to work properly, all kinds of junk. And it's just as simple as bleeding the air out of the system, especially if it's been recently serviced, like somebody put a radiator or thermostat or something of that nature in there, and all they did was dump coolant in and send it down the road. Well, you got to purge the air from the system before, you know, after you do any work on the cooling system. It's imperative that you do that. If not, problems can result. Link in the description once again to an overheat article that covers many of these things, including those cooling fans and potential problems that could be happening there. So there's a few things that could come into play, but I'd be looking closely at what's going on with the cooling fans. The other thing with bleeding the air out of the cooling system, using the methods that I show in the video that you're going to see, is that you run the engine until the cooling fans come on. And that way you can verify the operation of those cooling fans during the process of purging the air out of the system. So you cover a lot of bases with that method I outlined in that video. And don't worry that you don't have a bleeder valve. Bleeder valves are only there to make filling the system easier. They don't make it so you bleed the air out. You bleed the air out following the procedure in the video that you'll see in that article. I'll also post that down in the description to make it even easier for you to find. But Bagari, you're killing me tonight. Badiri Gahadra. I'm just gonna quit. Sorry. I hope you're having an awesome day. I am, and I'm once again sorry about your name. Question for you: 2002 4Runner. The shocks and struts have been replaced with OEM parts, except the rear still feels excessively bouncy. I bounced the tires, and that helped, but it still seems like there is rear bounce going down the road a lot. When I push down on the rear, it still takes a bounce and a half to settle. I can push the rear relatively easily well. Could the springs need to be replaced as well? Third gen 4Runners are known for sagging. Thanks a bunch, man. Okay, springs are only going to control ride height. They're not going to control the actual ride. What controls the suspension are what's more appropriately called the dampers. And, you know, shock struts, whatever, they actually are dampers. And what they do is they dampen the movement of the suspension. Now, it's quite common for people to forget to prime suspension parts, particularly shocks and struts, before you install that. And what I mean when I say that is when you first go to put on a strut or a shock or something like that, you depress it all the way and let it extend all the way. And you do that a couple of times. And I say to do this because many times these things are sitting on a shelf for months, weeks at a time. And as a result, the oil that's inside them can settle out. And when it does, it doesn't allow the damper to function properly. So before installing any kind of damper, I always make sure that I prime them first. I covered this in just about every strut video I've ever done. And it may come down to you removing those shocks again and trying it. They're original equipment parts. They should work. They should be as good at parts as you can get. And then you probably paid quite a bit for them. So take off the rear shocks and try that. And if you notice, in particular, when you first push down how there's little resistance and then there starts to resist more, then I would say that's bang on the problem right there. But that's what I would do. I would try to prime those suspension components and see if that solves the problem. Connor Folsom has a new Silverado, and he's deeply debating whether he should get a leveling kit or a lift kit or something in that nature. But I can't make up my mind. My concerns are what does it do to gas mileage and wear on suspension components that aren't designed to be tampered with. Also, what should I look for in component quality for something of that nature? Thanks, Eric. Your videos are awesome and have been a big help. Please, thanks. Oh. P.S. Thanks for your help with my '79 Corvette and the parasitic draw issue. I asked you on the first stream. The video you made for it was spot on. Awesome. I love hearing how my work helps people. Now, getting to your problems and your concerns about lift kits or leveling kits. Now, these are two very different things. Lift kit is going to lift the vehicle, thus raising it farther away from the wheels. And it's mainly done for ground clearance, like you're doing off-roading, that kind of thing. Some people do it for appearance. Great. But it's often a bit more involved, and it also depends on how far you go. So a lot of things here. You know, you change driveline angles when you do this. You may have to extend brake lines to do this. Somebody to check with, I think would be really cool, would be Bleepin' Jeep. Even though this isn't a Jeep, I mean, he does this off-roading stuff all the time, and he's really good with that. He makes some excellent videos. So check him out as far as lift kits go. I'm certain that he's done some video along those lines. I also think, I'm trying to think of somebody else that's done something like that. Oh, Chris Duke, Motors TV. He's done lift kits on Jeeps before on his channel. That being said, leveling kit is something you would use for, like, say, towing. Say you have a large boat or something like that, or you just have a tendency to weigh your vehicle down quite a bit. The leveling system is a system of airbags that basically bring the vehicle back up to level under heavy load. So two completely different systems. So you really have to think about what direction you're going in and how you're going to use the vehicle when you're all done. If you just want it to look pretty, whatever, you know, it might even be easier to just put bigger tires on it. I don't know. But of course, that presents its own problems, particularly if it's as new as I think it is and has like tire pressure monitoring and all that other stuff. And not to mention the speed sensors, and not to mention it screws up the speedometer. You know, modern vehicles really aren't made to be modified all that much. And if you do modify them, you really have to be on your game, because there's a lot more to change than just a few components here and there. A lot of times you have to tell a computer, hey, I changed something. Don't freak out. That's a very oversimplification, I realize, but you kind of get into that kind of thing. But particularly with lifting, you got to watch out for driveline angles, things like you put U-joints into binds. And yes, it will affect fuel economy. So figure out what you're going to do with the vehicle and then decide what to do from there. And you might check with some off-roading specialists, such as the people that I mentioned before. I'll put links in the description to their channels to make it easy. John Clark. Hey, I got one. As a 1992 Honda Accord with 182,000 miles. Recently, the tachometer started malfunctioning. Most of the times, it seems to work fine, but when the engine is idling, the tach reads 0 RPM. Also, when I'm driving down the highway, the tach reads about 500 RPM higher than it used to. It's supposed to be rated at 3,000 RPM at 70 miles per hour, and now it's at about 3,500 at 70. I verified that the torque converter is locking up, and like the transmission shifts into overdrive. Do you think it's the tach itself, or some kind of sensor, or sending the wrong signal? I'm leaning more towards the latter. And I've seen this quite a bit. And the question I'm going to pose to you, which you can't possibly answer, is do you have an aftermarket distributor? And I've said it several times, I freaking hate aftermarket distributors for Hondas. And in my opinion, and just about everyone I've seen, they're garbage, 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 garbage. You're better off going to a salvage yard and pulling an original equipment distributor than you are putting an aftermarket one in it. There, I've said it. Okay, to that effect, inside that aftermarket distributor is an igniter. That igniter is what sends the signal to your tachometer to do what it's supposed to do. Now, if you aftermarket igniters, I've seen cause problems like this. Hondas are super sensitive about the ignition systems on them. You mess with the ignition systems on Hondas, you might as well forget about it. I'm even talking about changing the wires. If you still have the original wires on your Honda, leave them alone. Don't change them. I don't care if the car has 200,000 miles on it. Leave those wires alone. Don't ever put aftermarket wires on, and if you do, NGKs. Outside of that, it could be the igniter's not sending the proper signal to the tachometer, or it could be a problem with the tachometer itself. It's hard to say, but most of the times when I see tachometer problems or people have a complaint about it, it usually goes back to the igniter, and that's where I mentioned the aftermarket distributor. They come complete, you bolt them in, away you go. It seems to be the shotgun approach to a lot of mechanics that don't necessarily work on Hondas a lot, that if a Honda isn't starting, they put on an aftermarket distributor, be done with it. I get it, okay? But I've done a video about how to test whether or not it's an igniter or a coil that's causing it not to start. Strongly suggest you take that route. So as far as solving this, now it's a 92, so there's no way you can plug a scan tool in and see what kind of signal is being put out of it. And as far as testing of that, oh man, I'm at a loss. I'm honestly at a loss with that. I would really have to look at that system to see, you know, what you're describing is a little weird. Because I have seen tachometers that go like this all over the place, and that's a lot of times has to do with the igniter. But none that they're doing what yours is doing, which is a little bit off, which leads me to suspect maybe something wrong with the tach and the cluster. So, and you say the rest of the operation of everything is fine. That's a tough one, man. And I'd have to put my eyeballs on it to really tell you what to do. But it's weird. But if you have an aftermarket distributor, I suspect the igniter inside of it. And also check the wiring and everything and make sure that all those little connectors are connected up in there properly. Adam Showers has a 2013 Ford Mustang. The transmission doesn't work. I took it to the shop down the street 2 days ago, and the mechanic said it would cost me $1,200. So I can't afford that. So can you tell me what I should do and how I can fix it? Okay, well, transmission doesn't work is a very broad description. And you check engine lights. You didn't even mention if it was a manual or an automatic transmission. So there's very little I can do here. Now, $1,200 doesn't sound like a new transmission. $1,200 sounds like transmission removal and parts replacement, something of that nature. Without having that information, there's really not much more I can offer. However, link in the description to an article I wrote about transmissions. Has videos, all kinds of stuff that may be helpful to you and may help you point you in the direction of what the problem with that transmission is. Thank you for having a name I can pronounce. And no offense to those of you that don't. It's my problem, not yours. Your mother knew what she was doing when she named you, or father, whatever. Okay, let's see. I'm just answering automotive questions, by the way, as far as, you know, because that's where people are here. L. Zeke has a Ford commercial vehicle. There is a short fused ground wire between the negative pole and the battery. A fused ground wire? It's not often I see ground wires being fused, but okay. And it goes to the floor panel. Battery is under the driver's seat. The fusible link is blowing over a period of time, and it happens when I crank the car. The fuse is 150 amp. The starter is 2.2 kilowatts. I removed, cleaned, and tested the starter. I cleaned up the earth wires and securely tightened them too. There is no earth wire between the negative pole and the battery and the starter. The starter is bolted to the gearbox, and the earth wire comes to the bolt of the starter from the chassis. I can't see why the fuse is blowing. I hope you have some ideas. Okay, high resistance normally is what we're looking at, and we're talking about a high amp circuit with the starter. In fact, there probably isn't another, not knowing what the commercial vehicle is used for, but there probably is nothing that draws more amps than the starter on that vehicle. Number of factors here. First, is there excessive resistance within the engine itself? Maybe the engine's out of time. You didn't mention whether this was like a diesel or a gas engine, but I know gas engines, if sometimes they're out of time or they're having an ignition system problem, it can be difficult to start and thus put more of a strain on a starter. Also, it's coming into question of how long you're actually having to crank it. Now, As far as the wiring and stuff, that sounds right. I mean, basically the chassis becomes the ground connection, and you need a big thick cable that goes between the two. So if there is an issue on the ground side of things, and maybe a corroded terminal or corroded cable, that can also increase the resistance in the circuit. The starter itself, you say you took it apart and cleaned it, but there still could be a problem in the starter. So that's another possibility, that there's excessive resistance inside the starter itself. Maybe it's got some windings that are going bad. There's a lot of things on the list here. And I might start by checking the amp draw of the starter and see if it's within the specification. I don't know the specifications that you should have on that vehicle. It's really difficult to say. I'll put a link in the description to how to find service manuals online, and that would be your best course of action, I think, and would give you probably the best information. But connections, that's where I would start. I mean, the easiest thing to do is start with all the connections at the battery, the connections at the body, the connections, the ground connections you mentioned, all those cables. Make sure that those are good, solid connections, no corrosion inside those things, no excessive resistance inside the cables themselves causing a problem. That way you can rule all those things out. Then you'd be looking at components instead. The first component on the list is a starter, because it sounds like that's where the issue might be. Once again, link in the description to electrical diagnosis article that I have that could have more information to help you from there. Don Lindsay has watched part 1 through 4 of the clutch replacement and diagnosis on the 2004 Ford Focus. Just had the entire clutch system replaced. The reverse went out, then 5th gear. We adjusted the linkage and it worked for a few weeks. Then something happened while driving along the highway. It lost power, still goes in all gears, but I started to put it into 5th gear and let the emergency brake off with it engaged, and it didn't stall. I don't know where to go from here. Okay, so I'm gathering that you have replaced the clutch recently, and perhaps using the instruction in the video that I had there. Well, there were a couple of things about that clutch job that were unique, and mainly being how the linkage operated. If that's not adjusted correctly, it will not shift correctly. So it's adjustable. There's those little plastic clips that are held on, and if those are not adjusted properly, it's not going to shift. But it almost sounds like you have a clutch problem there. So I hate to say this, but it almost sounds like they might have to come out, because there could be some issue with the installation of the clutch, and that something is not in there properly, something has not been adjusted properly. Difficult to say. The only thing I can recommend is watching the series again and seeing, if there was something that happened during your installation that is different from what you saw in my video. And if that's the case, then that might be the direction that could lead you to the source of that problem, because it's a little strange what you're talking about here. I mean, 5th and reverse, I would say those are both on the same adjustment, I believe. But the fact that you can let the clutch out with the engine running and the parking brake on and the engine doesn't stall, that could just mean that's not in gear, is what that could mean. So I've got my fingers crossed it's an adjustment issue, and you just got to get it adjusted properly. However, if it goes beyond that, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to get back in there and take that transmission out and inspect the clutch and pressure plate and make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. February, 99 Accord V6 sedan, changing the lower ball joint, and it didn't have a snap ring or C-clip or anything. I presume the ball joint is from the factory. Should I be concerned and buy some clips from Honda to put in there, or just don't worry about them? I believe around that time they basically made it so that their ball joints were pressed in. They weren't with a snap ring, and they started selling the entire control arm assembly around that time. So as far as getting them, there is no snap ring with the type that are pressed in of that nature. Now, you may get an aftermarket ball joint that does have a snap ring, but if you're going for a Honda ball joint, if they'll say the ball joint and then tell you got it by the control arm, then there is no snap ring. It's all pressed together. And the only place you can do that is with an aftermarket part. All right, I'm going to do random here. I didn't realize how late it was getting. I'm just losing the time today. I feel like that rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. Aj Natui has a 2001 Impala. Has a check engine light for EGR and upstream O2. Will cleaning replacing the EGR valve clear that code? Also, what is the best way to clean an EGR? Well, my friend Chris Fix did a really good video on cleaning EGRs. Now, whether or not that's going to fix your problem, I'm not really sure. It depends on the code you're getting, if I'm honest. And as far as O2 sensors, well, you know, they can set like 100 different codes. So, and not have anything to do with the sensor itself. But yeah, check out Chris Fix's video on EGR cleaning. It's fairly recent. Jeff Biderman, how hard would it be to replace coolant elbows on a 2000 Buick LeSabre? And would it be better to use newer aluminum coolant elbows? Honestly, I don't know. Never done that job, so I really couldn't say. And better, newer aluminum ones also depends on cost, depends on use of the vehicle and condition. So if you want to upgrade, then I say upgrade. But not having done the job, there's honestly very little I can offer. Apologies for that. Let's see. Alseka Yavagic. Hey, Eric, I have a Fiat Brava, and the question is about AC. The compressor turns on, and I can hear the Freon gas hissing inside, but no cooling. However, the hissing is quite noticeable, but could this be a stuck expansion valve? You know, I'm honestly going to say I don't recommend AC work for the DIY. There are so many variables. There are so many things that come into play with AC diagnosis. I mean, you're talking about the mechanical part of the system. You're talking about the pressure temperature differential. You're talking about the electrical side of the system. And, you know, it's a lot. It's a lot. And even experienced technicians sometimes struggle with it. And I've seen DIYers get in there and sometimes cause more problems than they solve. I've got an entire thing on HVAC, an entire thing on AC diagnosis, videos, everything is how to charge a system, how to, you know, diagnose whether or not it's having a problem. Link to that will be down in the description. I suggest you look through it, and perhaps that can help you find an answer to that problem. All right, last one. Adam Phoenix, how do you solve an engine running cold too long? Great show, thanks. All right, I'm taking it. You're looking at it. It's not heating up properly. Either it depends. Running cold too long. Is it the engine that's running cold, or is it the HVAC? Like you've got the heater on, it's the middle of winter, it doesn't seem to be heating up. Could be a thermostat, could be air in the system. I always check for air in the system first. Like if you have a cooling system problem, check for air in the system. I can't tell you how many problems are solved just by doing that. So before you spend money, before you throw parts at it, check for air in the system. It will help you. Outside of that, it could be a thermostat problem. I've done a video about thermostats and diagnosing them, and you know, right down to the point where you throw them in boiling water and watch them open up. So it's a cool video. I like that video. All right, last one. Joe Rezek, thanks for your audit help. Would it be better to torque down lug nuts in the air or with the vehicle back down to the ground? And would you recommend NICs on lug nuts? Never put anything on lug nuts, especially NICs. Don't put any kind of lubricant on there. They're designed to go on, just to go on. You put goop on them, not good. I torque them when they're on the ground, because if you try to do it while it's in the air, the wheel can spin around. But it's on the ground, can help keep it where it is. And to make it even easier, set the parking brake before you get started. All right, I'm going to wrap this show up. We've gone out actually a little bit more than a half hour, but I hope the information has been useful to you. As stated many times throughout the program, there is an FAQ page on my website that contains a lot of information and videos that can help you with, well, as you can see, the majority of the questions that I get asked. There's information there that can help you. Also the forum, let's not forget about that. Once again, if you're watching this on YouTube, I cannot see your comments that are posted there at this time, so obviously the show is over too, so I won't be answering those questions. If you're posting questions to the Google Plus event after this concludes, which is right now, I won't be answering those until the next show on February 17th. Same bat time, same bat channel. Outside of that, I want to thank you for watching. If you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google Plus, obviously, Facebook, and also Twitter. And I close each of my videos, even these live shows, with be safe, have fun, stay dirty. Once again, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.